Welcome to the stage, Michael Moe.
So I call this talk Star Search. My whole adult life I've spent trying to find stars, the stars of tomorrow today in the investment business. So to identify and invest in these fast-growing, rapidly growing companies. And so the first question I have, and it will ultimately will tie into AI, but where do big companies come from? And so just like trees don't start as trees, they start as acorns. Big companies don't start as big companies, they start as small companies. So when Amazon started, it had basically a one office and painted a sign. Today, Amazon has $620 billion in revenue, $2 trillion market cap. NVIDIA started at the back of the napkin at a Denny's in San Jose. Today, 78% of NVIDIA's employees are millionaires with a $3.5 trillion market cap. Google started, who's ever been to Bucks in Woodside? Bucks, famous for a lot of companies have started right out of this little restaurant on a napkin. That's where Google got its start. Today, Google has 99,000 queries per second. 72% of the smartphone market is Google. 1 billion hours of YouTube is watched a day. And Google has nearly half the planet on its platform. 165 University Avenue is called the Karma Building because dozens of companies started there that became billion-dollar businesses. In 1976, Apple was started by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, and their vision from day one was to create an insanely great computer. And this is what an insanely great computer looked like in 1976. Today, Apple has a $3.5 trillion market cap. So when FedEx was started, it was a senior project by Fred Smith at Yale University, and he wrote a business plan which became FedEx, and he got a C on his paper because his professor said to get better than a C, it has to actually be a feasible idea. And so the good news is that Fred Smith didn't listen to that advice from his professor. He started Federal Express, but like many startups, it took more time and more money than he had forecast. And so he's down to his last $5,000, and his venture capitalist wouldn't put any more money in. So he did what any great entrepreneur would do. Took that $5,000, came here to Las Vegas, spent the weekend on the blackjack tables, made it $31,000, and the rest is history. Literally doing whatever it took to succeed. This is the first Starbucks store in Pikes Place, Seattle, 1971. And the vision of Howard Schultz was basically to have a Starbucks in every corner. And ultimately, that's effectively what they've done. 5 million cups per day of Starbucks. So Starbucks, I was fortunate, back to my history of trying to identify the stars of tomorrow today, I was lucky enough to be involved with Starbucks from the very beginning. I was the first person to write research on Starbucks coffee in 1992 and wrote a book called How to Identify and Invest in the Hot Stocks of Tomorrow, finding the next Starbucks. And from that really was a master class in terms of what are the characteristics of great emerging growth businesses. And so it really came down to really two philosophies in terms of what we were trying to do. One is that growth drives enterprise value. You can see that in many, many examples. So Tesla's, over the last dozen years, Tesla's stock has appreciated 61% per year, but that's because its revenue appreciated 62% per year. Google stock appreciated 27% per year since it went public in 2004. That's because its revenue has grown at 27% per year during that period of time. ServiceNow, 41% revenue growth, 39% stock appreciation, and on and on and on. So that was philosophy number one that was created. The second philosophy was the characteristics of these emerging stars is what I call the 5 Ps that we look for: people, product, potential, predictability, and purpose. So when I first met Howard Schultz, he had braces. I mean, there's nothing about him that you would say this is going to be a future world leader. But when you met him and you heard the vision that he had and what drove him, what the people around him, you could see these people were going to do something very, very special. And so the first P is the most important P, and that's people. Winners find a way to win. Losers find a way to lose. Product, we're looking for companies that are the leader of what they do. One-of-a-kind business, have a claim to fame. When you look at technology businesses in particular, it's disproportionate gain to a leader in the category. The third P is potential. How big can the company become? So when I first met Starbucks, they just had stores, had a handful of stores in Seattle and Vancouver, and had just gone into Chicago. But the math that I did, if they could have as many stores around the country and ultimately the world, based on the number of stores they had in Seattle, I said, gosh, they can have more stores than McDonald's. And today, they have 40,000 units around the world, which is approximately what McDonald's has. Predictability, having what's the visibility of that growth? So if growth drives enterprise value, how can we be confident in terms of what that future growth really looks like? And so going back to Starbucks example, you say, gosh, well, a restaurant are notoriously unpredictable. But in fact, with Starbucks, their average customer went there 22 times a month. So you could start to see that visibility in terms of how that growth could play out. And the fifth P is purpose. And this is this idea that great businesses aren't created just because the entrepreneur says, gosh, I just want to find a way to make a lot of money. It's what drives the great entrepreneurs today are that they have this feeling that what they're doing makes a difference. And in the Starbucks case, over 30 years ago, Howard Schultz literally believed that they were going to change the world at one cup of coffee at a time. And in fact, they did. So that formula resulted, we were fortunate to invest in Facebook today with a $1.8 trillion market cap, Palantir, $233 billion market cap, Spotify, $122 billion market cap. By the way, all early adopters of AI. I'm going to skip that. I wrote another book called The Global Silicon Valley Handbook. And the Global Silicon Valley Handbook was really the thesis behind our firm, GSV, which is this idea that the mindset of innovation and entrepreneurship that's made Silicon Valley such a special place was going to spread throughout the world. And we wanted to connect Silicon Valley to this emerging global Silicon Valley. So when we had that thesis in 2010, 92% of all venture capital was the United States, and most of that was the Bay Area. Today, 65% of all venture capital is outside of the US, so this global Silicon Valley thesis has really played out in a major way. And so we say it's really not just between San Francisco and San Jose, but from Austin to Boston, from Chicago to Sao Paulo, from Mumbai to Shanghai to Dubai. This is this emerging global Silicon Valley, and it's wildly exciting for innovation and entrepreneurship, which is where, when an AI gets put in this mix in terms of this explosion of ideas, it's really quite remarkable what I believe the next 20, 30 years is going to look like. So if you look at, the kind of reality of where we're at, human capabilities have been on a linear curve, and technology, computers, is on an exponential curve, and we're at this point. So what this basically says is that technology pretty soon is going to replace the technologist. And this idea of what humans do to ramp up on the exponential curve is really a significant issue that faces our future, which I'm actually positive about. So when you look at what AI is going to be able to enable, it's going to create a time dividend, which I'm going to talk about in a second. It's multiplication by division. I'll talk about division of labor, moneyballing everything, and learning at the speed of light back to how do we get on this exponential curve. So the analogy I like to talk about in terms of where I think the real opportunities are is electricity was pretty spectacular. I mean, truly a disruptive technology. But the real power behind electricity and the opportunities was to let companies like Coca-Cola, which wouldn't exist without electricity, become a major business today, $307 billion market cap. So what AI does is it eliminates friction and manufactures time. And so this time dividend is a huge, huge, huge idea. So when we look at about this time dividend, where is it applied? I call it one is multiplication by division. So Adam Smith, in his book, Wealth of Nations, which really was the birth of capitalism, talked about division of labor. And in it, he talked about this pin factory, where historically, when a factory made pins, one person took it from beginning to the end. And then what was able to be shown through this division of labor is breaking up these different tasks, these different functions, and through it, productivity went through the roof, a 50x increase in productivity. That's what I talk about, multiplication by division. So we're humans doing what humans do uniquely well, but yet AI do everything else. And that is this multiplication by division is really a key component of what is going to happen to the future. The hive enterprise, you look at this businesses today, we talked about the knowledge economy for 30 years and how really the businesses are competing on brains and knowledge. What AI is going to enable to do is take the collective wisdom, the collective brains within an enterprise, and be able to provide it in a real-time basis. So you used to have just-in-case learning, meaning you learn something just in case somehow, some way, you'd actually be able to apply it sometime in the future. Today, you're going to have real-time, just-in-time learning, at your fingertips, and the enterprise, this kind of collective knowledge, becomes instantaneous. Moneyballing everything. I like to say moneyballing motherhood. So you look, what that really was talking about is how you're able to use real-time data to influence decisions. So it's not just wives' tales and instincts. You're able to actually have specific knowledge, data, that lets you inform you. You might not take the data. My friend Bill Campbell, who's ever heard of Bill Campbell, the coach of Silicon Valley? Put your hand up if you have. So Bill Campbell probably is the most important person that you've never heard of, based on the people's response here. Silicon Valley wouldn't exist without Bill Campbell. Bill was the CEO of Intuit, but he was Steve Jobs' closest advisor. He was Google's closest advisor. On their boards is Jeff Bezos' advisor, Mark Andreessen's advisor. They called Bill the coach of Silicon Valley, but he said famously, when we have facts, we use facts. When we have opinions, we use mine. And that was sort of his philosophy, but that was because you often didn't have the data that actually allowed you to make these kind of real-time decisions, but moneyballing critical things is now at everybody's fingertips. And obviously the 24/7 assistant, I call it the task robot, which is something that is going to be incredible for everybody, whether you're just now you have your chief of staff for work or you have a 24/7 tutor. All this is going to be something that is absolutely, it's here and now, but it's what you look 5 years from now, what's going to be going on is hard to even comprehend. So looking at the applications for learning. So you used to go, you have this cadence compression from, you went to your class on Monday and now you don't know what you're trying to figure out. It's Tuesday, so you have to go a whole week before you get unstuck. Well, now you can get unstuck, it's 2 in the morning. You go from regression to the mean, where you're basically teaching to whatever the common denominator is to actually have hyper-personalized learning. You go from a calendar progressing from September to May, and then you go to the next grade to being able to progress where your competency is at. All this being transformative. And going from learning to earning, and without a huge gap between. In fact, if you look at what's going on with corporations, a very big issue is this idea that what used to be kind of an entry-level job has gone away and been replaced by AI, and that's only going to get more pronounced. So all this adds up to effectively creating a significant increase in terms of clock speed. And the feedback loop between information and how to adjust and continue to iterate has gone, is going to happen in a way that is mind-blowing. So this multiplication by division, learning at the speed of light, the hive enterprise, cadence compression, the task robot, Moneyball, and everything, this time dividend is the really big idea. So Malcolm Gladwell famously wrote Outliers. It talked about it took 10,000 hours to master some type of expertise. It's going to go closer to 10 hours. So what used to take years will take months. What took months took weeks. What took weeks will be days, days, hours, hours, minutes, and minutes into seconds. So what AI is to our brain is what nuclear fusion is to energy. Effectively, it becomes this incredible multiplier and enhancer. And so this merging between the physical and the digital worlds with AI, and it's not man versus machine, it's really man and machine working together and learning and earning, taking data and turning it into wisdom. And all this is this collision that happens. It's going to be this remarkable advancement of humankind. So the last 20 years has been about making man more like a machine. The next 20 years is going to be making machines more like a man. Machines have chips, humans have hearts. And when you put it together, the secret sauce was you combine these smarts and hearts. And what I like to say is the great businesses of tomorrow, the star search, is where you're going to see the great businesses are going to have the ambition of a for-profit and the heart of a not-for-profit. So the time dividend with this knowledge proliferation, and what that equals is this innovation explosion. So if you think about what the last 25 years has been like in terms of just, it's hard to imagine in 2000, how different it is today in terms of what we're able to do. Well, you haven't seen anything yet. Because this next 25 years of this combination is going to result in a world that I think, can be a little bit scary, but I think it's wildly exciting. And for entrepreneurs, the businesses are going to be created, are going to truly transform the world in ways that we can't even imagine. So with that, I'd like to say, make your dash count. We named our media business Dash Media because both for fast-growing businesses, but also this idea that you get one life, and so make that worthwhile. So thank you very much. I'm glad it's a privilege to be here, and I hope this conference has been as great as I've enjoyed it. So thank you so much.